It's December 5th, 2020. My name is Susan Oppenheimer, and I was present at both the Legacy March for Martin Luther King and the open housing marches in Chicago in 2016, as well as the original march in 1966. And so I'm actually going to gear my remarks to 1966. After saying that I think that the organizers and the artists who built the memorials to the marchers and to Dr. King did a brilliant job, and it was long past due to have a memorial in Chicago celebrating the summer of 1966 and the marches for open housing. But what you might not know is that there actually was a memorial before this memorial, which is somewhere in some corner, hopefully, that somebody can dig out. And that was created in 2014 by a high school class of a gentleman named Victor Harbison, who has since passed away, who was a Chicago public school teacher at Gage Park High School of history and civics. He was a brilliant teacher, very engaging with the students. A disproportionate number of his students from this community went on to college. So in what Victor would do with his students is have them write a project at the end of the year in his civics class. And he was talking to his class and asking the students for ideas of what they might do their projects on. And there were some students who were completely stuck and had no idea. And so he talked to them at great length about the 1966 march and what had happened in Marquette Park. And one student raised his hand and he said, "I don't believe you. I don't believe that there was anything that Dr. Martin Luther King did in Marquette Park in 1966. And Victor said, "How can you, in the face of all the evidence that I'm giving you, deny that this happened?" And the kid said, "There's no marker, there's no memorial. There's nothing that says he was here." And Victor said, "That's your project." And so this class actually wound up taking on the building, the gathering of stories, doing the research, involving the local alderwomen, IIT, whose students built a computer program to store the information of the research. Kiosks were built, I think by the IIT students, I'm not sure. The Chicago Park District was involved, giving up space in the Gage Park Fieldhouse, where all of this eventually was stored, and not sure if it's still there. In 2014, I was invited by Victor to present to his class my experience at the march and what I did with the movement. And so my memories are really from my notes from that time, because I hadn't thought about it for many years, and that's where I kind of put it together. And now I look at that time in 2014 and look at where we are in 2020, and it's quite an amazingly different time. So I just want to say that there are a lot of personal references here of friends who I've known for 55 years or so since I was in the movement, and who have continued to influence Chicago history in this period. And so I feel like it's important. The history for me is wrapped up in these people, because movements are made up of people. And it's the friends and activists who now span 55 years of friendships of my adult life with whom I have been in these relationships. So I consider that I was a foot soldier in the civil rights movement in Chicago in the summer of 1966. There were action centers set up by the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Dr. Martin Luther King's group, and many local civil rights and church organizations. And in these action centers, there would be plans for the local community to raise issues about why housing was not open equally to Blacks and whites. So all of these marches were about desegregation in the 1960s. And one of these people who I met. Well, the action, let me go back here. The action center that I worked out of was either called the New Friendship Baptist Church then, or the Fellowship Baptist Church. It's at 71st and Halsted. And I could not remember the name of the church in 2014 when I was putting this together for Victor's class. And so I called my friend Tim Black, Dr. Tim Yule Black, who was then 95 years old, who in fact turns 102 on Monday, December 7th, 2020, which is also Pearl Harbor Day. Dr. Black spans the entire century of US history and had some influence on and influenced by significant events throughout the 20th century. I'm sorry, the 21st century, and now the 21st. So let's see. So Tim, when I called him in 2090, when he was 95 years old in 2014, I called him and said, I can't remember the name of the action center for Dr. King's March in Marquette Park. And he said, Fellowship Baptist Church, without losing a beat. So he is the man who has been one of the great memories of this whole period. The action centers would, talk to the neighbors, talk to the organizations in the communities, explained what the open housing issues were about, asked people to join in. And every single night of the summer, there were rallies at Operation Push, at the main churches on the South Side, along Cottage Grove and Martin Luther King Drive. And the speakers were Dr. King, Jesse Jackson, who founded Operation Push, Andrew Young, who became the mayor of Atlanta, the U.S. ambassador, and later the UN ambassador to the UN, and James Bevel. Hundreds filled the churches, where we heard speakers chant, "Black is beautiful and I am somebody," and where we sang and learned the great spirituals and other songs that were used by the civil rights movement, many of which had been created during slavery or adapted during slavery and then readapted during the civil rights movement. Dr. King had come to Chicago invited by some leaders like Al Raby, who later married one of my close friends, Patricia Novick, who is still active to this day. Al Raby and Tim Yule Black were key in the election of Harold Washington, who was the first Black mayor of the city and served from 1983 until he died in office in 1987. So that's kind of the background for me of I was working out of the Action Center at the New Fellowship Baptist Church. Dr. King, Andrew Young, and other aides would be with him on occasion in the Action Center, making plans for the march. And so then we come to the day of the march. So I lived on the north side, and on the day of the march, I drove a car that was brand new for me. I had bought it from a friend who had it completely refurbished. I parked it along the park because I found out where the march was going to be ending, and I thought the march will end and I will get into my car and drive home. Not to be. As we were marching, we went through the park. Everything was pretty peaceful. We went from one of the large churches, I can't remember which, walked across Englewood into the park, around through the park. And the trouble began as we were beginning to leave the park. There were first a few rocks, one here, one there, and suddenly it was like a monsoon of missiles incoming. Rocks, bricks, glass bottles, just, you couldn't see the sky. There were so many things coming in. And it seemed like a very long distance at the time, from not quite at the end of the park, all the way until we got to, I keep forgetting the name of where we were, but I'll come upon it later in my notes. Anyone who was there that day, and you say to them, what was the most memorable thing about that day? they will say the rocks.